Okay, welcome back to Talking in the Library, our new episode. And I've got Jamie Bloom with us again today. And he's going to be talking to us about a blog he wrote earlier on this year about the Proto-Indo-European language. So could you kind of explain what all that's about for those of us who don't know? What's the point of it?
Proto-Indo-European is an ancient language which has now been lost completely. No one speaks it anymore. And there's no written record of it. But linguists have reconstructed it from all the words in different languages across the Indo-European continents that have similar words. And from that, working back, you can extrapolate what words and grammatical structures and things were in the language. And by doing this and working out roughly where the language was, you can find out a lot about the history of the area in which it was spoken. For example, words like wheel. If you can find out where the word came from and where it was first used and where it's been and where it hasn't been, you can estimate roughly how old the wheel was and where it was invented and where it moved across to and who used it. So in that way, ancient languages are sort of part of the archaeological record. They're not artefacts, but they can tell you a lot about the history of an area.
Okay, that's very interesting. I never thought of it like that. So one can tell what an object is by how old an object is, perhaps by the language and how old the language is and where it was and things like that.
Yes, because you'll never find the oldest wheel ever made because it would have been made out of wood and it'll be long gone. But you can find out when that word was first used and where, and that tells you.
So very useful for historians then.
Yes.
So could you just explain what is meant by consonant shift?
Yes, so this is a sort of key part of decoding a language like this, because if you know any Latin, you'll know that the word for father is pater, which begins with a P, and so throughout history, mainly because people are lazy when they talk, and so language changes through that, certain consonants in words have started to shift into other consonants. So Latin, the P shifted to an F, which is where you get father and vater in German. But it's not just that word, you've got a lot of other consonants that have also shifted, mainly from sort of harder plosive sounds to fricatives.
Oh gosh, well, what's a fricative, just for those of us who aren't familiar with the term?
It's a term used in linguistics for different types of letters, like an F, that aren't a hard sound, but are just a slow release of air, usually through your lips.
Okay, so that's fascinating. How present is Latin, though, in the modern world today?
Latin is surprisingly common still in the world around us. You don't really notice it, but all sorts of things we use on a day-to-day basis come from Latin. An obvious one is AM and PM, which is ante-meridian and post-meridian, before the noon and after the noon, on clocks. But then you've also got all sorts of other things like BC and AD, which is before Christ, and Anno Domini, which is year of our Lord, whatever. But then also, it's often in legal terms that you get Latin, but it's involved in medicine and all sorts of other things. So good knowledge of Latin helps you with all sorts of things.
Lots of flowers, for example, aren't they?
Yes, all animals and flowers have a Latin proper name, which helps. If you know what it is, you can sort of work out what it means.
So, in terms of learning a language then, how useful is Latin for learning new languages?
Latin is very useful when you're trying to learn a new language, particularly a European language, one descended from Latin, for two reasons. Most of all, it's the grammar is very similar in lots of languages, and ancient languages, because there's not such a wide vocabulary still in existence, you tend to focus on the grammar while you're learning it, and the words you, not purely, but are often learned just so you can use the grammar. And so if you have a solid understanding of Latin grammar, it makes it much easier to understand the grammatical constructs of other languages. And learning any language helps with that, but Latin is a good one because it was first before all the European languages, so they're all in some way constructed from it, which makes it helpful. But then also the vocabulary, of course, is useful because a lot of words are cognates. They come from Latin and they sound very similar and mean the same thing. So if you have a wide Latin vocabulary, you'll be able to work out often short, simple phrases in different languages, even if you have no actual understanding of them.
That's really useful, isn't it? Final question now. Latin's very useful. We've established that from our conversation. But why do you think Latin's fallen out of use so much, especially in schools in particular?
Yes, it's hard to put a specific reason to this, but I think during the 50s and 60s and 70s, everyone had a very rosy tinged view of the future, and there was a sort of feeling that the past wasn't needed anymore, partly because of the world wars and then all the technological advancements. People thought you could forget about history because you wouldn't need it. And so as part of that, lots of buildings were knocked down and new things were built. And then the education system was reformed, and it was decided that modern languages would be more useful than ancient languages. And if it's not being taught in schools, then you don't have the teachers to teach it. And one sort of last bastion of Latin was the Catholic Church. It was the language of all Catholic priests for thousands of years. But then in the 60s, with the Second Vatican Council, they declared that you didn't have to use Latin, you could use the vernacular. And that was taken to just mean you should use your own language and you could forget about Latin. And so up until that point, almost any priest you came across, you'd be able to just have a chat with in Latin. But since then, that's fallen out of use, and no one really speaks conversational Latin anymore.
Have you ever spoken conversational Latin with anybody?
I haven't, no. My Latin's nowhere good near
Oh,
good enough
no.
for that. I would like to be able to, but...
So overall, I mean, lots of schools don't teach Latin. Are you grateful that Stamford School's given you the opportunity to learn Latin?
Yes, I'm very pleased. I was not certain that I was going to come here, and then I got a scholarship, and so I decided to. And I'm pleased I did, not least for the opportunity to learn Latin and Greek and do classics, which are all things I probably wouldn't have come across in a different school. So.
That's really interesting, and I hope that everyone listening and watching this video has learnt as much as I have, because I've learnt a lot from that. So thank you again, Jamie.
Thank you.
As always, lovely to talk to you.